Welcome to Up One, the podcast where we take a deep dive into the science behind supplements, therapies, and diagnostics. I'm Sawyer Stone, your guide through the maze of health claims, here to ask the big questions.
And I'm Dr. Bill Andrews. With decades of experience in medical research, I've dedicated my career to uncovering the real science behind disease, aging, and human health. On this podcast, we don't just skim the surface of scientific studies. We conduct a critical meta-analysis, separating credible research from misleading conclusions.
There's a lot of noise out there, conflicting studies, bold claims, and endless marketing. Up One is here to cut through it all and bring you science-backed insights that you can actually trust.
We're talking prevention, diagnostics, treatments, and the big questions shaping the future of health.
If you're serious about understanding the science of health and longevity without the fluff, let's take it up one. Today, we're tackling a question that sparks a lot of frustration and a lot of myths. Why haven't we cured major diseases like cancer, Alzheimer's, or heart disease yet?
It's easy to assume that with all the money, tech, and talent in the world, we should have cures by now. But the truth is more complex and more eye-opening than many realize.
We'll debunk some of the most common myths, examine the real scientific roadblocks, and talk about what's actually working behind the scenes. All right, Dr. Bill, our first question is maintaining a positive attitude sufficient to overcoming diseases like cancer? So many people believe that positive mindsets alone can lead to recovery from serious illnesses. Does this align with the current scientific understanding?
Well, it definitely helps. A lot of health-related things are dependent upon oxidative stress, inflammation, things like that. And we know that uh, positive thinking, optimism, things like that do reduce stress and oxidative damage. And so that alone provides a benefit to people's health. Now, I've spoken a lot on things like telomere shortening, and two studies I frequently talk about relate to the idea that people that are pessimistic have shorter telomeres than people that are optimistic. Uh, and which was kind of a surprise when people did the study, or did the studies. The the point is that if you think you won't live to be 100, it's more likely that you won't, just because of pessimism is accelerating aging. So yeah, anything you do that's positive thinking is going to be a benefit, but it's not the only thing. I don't believe, and I don't think anybody in the scientific community believes that that's sufficient all by itself.
Okay. All right. Well, why do you think we haven't cured cancer despite significant technological advancements? Some people argue that if humanity can achieve feats like a moon landing, curing cancer should be attainable. What is it about cancer that makes it uniquely challenging?
It's probably not so much cancer as relative to all other health related issues, but um, let's see. John F. Kennedy said, "Let's go to the moon" in 1961. So all the funding went to one organization, NASA, and there was a pretty much big emphasis on making it successful. I mean, people weren't going to cut corners, say, "Okay, here's a way to do it cheaper. Here's a way we can make more money off of it," when they knew that their success or their failure would affect the lives of the astronauts and things like that. So it was like a different type of thing, and most of the work was done internally at NASA, and it wasn't done like, well, let's go to Nixon now. Nixon declared the war on cancer in 1971, and right away that was approached from a totally different way. There, National Cancer Society, things like that were created, but it wasn't so much that all the cancer research was done in one internal organization like NASA. It was actually more providing grants to academic research labs to focus on getting the research done elsewhere. So there, two entirely different things. One is all the work was done under one organization in terms of going to the moon, whereas in curing cancer and other diseases, it's all been granting organizations, funding research labs to do the work. And the problem with the later approach was that funding was never enough. There's all kinds of obstacles in academic labs to actually get work done. The principal investigators, the people who really should be at the lab bench doing the research, they have teaching requirements. They're spending every bit of their time writing grants. They have to continually publish because of this notion of publish or perish. In fact,
Mm.
one of the main things that granting organizations look at when they are approving or disapproving a grant is the number of publications that the author has. And so a lot of these things have really interfered with getting the cures done. And like it or not, there is this knowledge that it's actually not good for society to keep the longer lived around, especially when they're unhealthy. And so it's actually more beneficial to society to eliminate the longer lived. Uh, and as I say, like it or not, I'm totally opposed to that. But from a government perspective, yeah, why spend a lot of money to only increase the burden already that exists on the government of keeping people in nursing homes and assisted living homes and hospices and things like that. Um, so there's been a lot of different reasons why uh, curing cancer and other diseases aren't the same as sending a man to the moon. Now, there's other ways of getting funding. You don't have to necessarily, if somebody is interested in curing cancer or something like that, an alternative to getting grants is uh, find investors, but traditional investors. They're actually in the business of investing because they're trying to make profits. They're trying to get quick
Mhm.
return on their investments. And so, I mean, I've experienced this firsthand a lot. Okay, I've actually, for instance, I've never ever accepted a grant, um, and there's in the what is it called? Federal Code of Regulations. I think it's section 401 or 410 or something like that. That it talks about how in grants, if you don't reach certain milestones, et cetera, you will actually lose control of your project. The government will take it over. And so that's one of the reasons, like when I've applied for grants and got the grants, I've always sent the money back because of the uh, restrictions. Well, a lot of more restrictions than the ones I just mentioned, but there's a lot of restrictions that actually interfere with actually getting the work done and put you at great risk of losing all your intellectual property.
Okay.
So traditional investors is another way to go. And as I said, they're all interested in a return on investment. And in my past, when I've had traditional investors, I've had like 50 plus investors. Uh, I've raised 30 over $30 million to do research, but the investors are all interested in quick return on investments. And it's not just me. I've got lots of friends that have started companies and have experienced the same type of things. So the investors would take over my scientific strategy meetings, and not just at my company now, but at previous companies that I worked with too. Same kind of thing. We'd all be under control of the investors' wishes more than the goal of what the company was first created for. Investors would take over my scientific strategy meetings and tell the scientists to work on something else to bring quick return on investment and make some profits. And then we'll get back to the main goal later on. And so we would do that. But then, like, especially what hit me hard at my company 10, 12 years ago was we succeeded at everything. It was major success. Uh, all the investors got together in a big room and discussed how excited they were about the success they're celebrating. And the head of the investment group got on stage after I'd already presented all the results on stage, and said, "Okay, I think it's time to sell the company,
Oh my
okay,
gosh.
for a profit." And that blew me away because they were gonna sell all my intellectual property, my, uh, non-compete clauses and my contracts prevented me from doing further work in the area because I would be competing with the company that they sold my company to, uh,
Mm.
and I've had a lot of friends ruined simply on that kinda, like, tactic by investors. I was lucky in that I had, like, of the 50 plus investors, there were 2 or 3 of them that were more interested in curing their aging than in actually getting quick return on their investment, and they orchestrated a complete takeover, which gave me control of the company, 100% ownership of the company, and, I was able to continue my research. So, and on the condition that I never went with traditional investors or venture capitalists, again, and that's something I haven't done since then. Self-investing is a way. I mean, if I had thought the best way to actually get cancer cured would be to find one of those ultra high net worth individuals. And pretty much you got to focus on the high net worth individuals because they're not as focused on return on investment. They're sitting somewhere in their sauna thinking that a cure for aging and cure for cancer and things like that are underway, and they can all they have to do is wait for this to happen. But it's not happening. Uh, it would be nice if somebody were to listen to this podcast and get in contact with one of these unknown ultra high net worth individuals and tell them, you know, put some of your wealth because there's trillionaires out there. They're not going to show up in Forbes, but there's people with trillions of dollars that could fund this research and say, okay, let's actually cure cancer instead of just trying to find a way to make a profit. Let's
Yeah.
let's let's not cut corners like on in NASA. Nobody would say, "Oh, we can do this cheaper this way." It might put astronauts at risk, but let's let's not focus on investment. Okay, so the ultra high net worth individual could do that same type of thing, and I think that's what's really needed. We need to get some of these unknown ultra high net worth individuals to get off their butts and
Yeah.
actually take charge. And you know, they're not going to know what to do, but they can find people like myself and others that
Yeah.
know what needs to be done. I was National Inventor of the Year for my cancer research. I know a lot about cancer. I remember when I was at Geron Corporation, I outlined uh, 5 different ways of curing cancer, research that we could do at curing cancer. But 4 of the 5 uh, required just designing something, whereas the 5th one required some discovery research. And I uh, I was very vocal about the ideas that the first 4 uh, would never succeed because of the fact that cancers will always come back, etc. Uh, and most notably, there's a drug on the market right now called Rytelo, Rytelo, and I invented that over 30 years ago. And it was called GRN 163 when I first invented it, and then they changed it to imeltastat, Imetelstat, and then later changed it to Rytelo. It's been through clinical studies. It's only just recently, after 30 years, finally been uh, approved for uses in some types of cancer.
Mm.
But what I made it really clear 30 plus years ago is that yes, it will make cancers go away, but it will also skyrocket mutation rates, which will increase
Oh,
the ability of the cancer to come back.
yeah.
Uh, and it's not because imeltastat causes mutations, but it's because it inhibits an enzyme called telomerase, which I was led the research that discovered. Uh, and inhibiting telomerase will make telomeres get shorter, and short telomeres, critically short telomeres, will cause mutation rates to skyrocket, cause things like chromotherpes and uh, Cottaegis, which are two different forms of very visible mutations that occur in cells. And that when you start increasing mutation rates in cancer cells, you only end up finding that some of those cells find ways to overcome whatever you're treating them with, and they
Yeah.
come back. So
Yeah.
now the approach that I've always taken was to, instead of inhibiting telomerase, was to actually poison any telomerase positive cells. And that would require, I came up with some idea called toxic nucleotides that would only, uh, nucleotides would be incorporated into DNA when either telomerase creates new DNA in the chromosome, or when polymerases create new DNA during DNA replication. But find toxic nucleotides that only telomerase would recognize and other polymerases in the cell wouldn't recognize. But they decided, oh, that's too much work, too expensive, can't get done. So it never got done. Okay, so now we got these drugs on the market, and there's all four of the five ideas that I recommended that were taken on, and none of them are really working for all the reasons said they wouldn't work 30 years ago. And But that's the problem. So again, it's all funding. It's all trying to find some way of getting the research done at the same time satisfying the funding sources. That's been the really big obstacles. And as I said, I've worked with a lot of great scientists. A lot of them have become very frustrated. I'll never forget the day when we were working on a way of preventing blood clots with a uh, molecule that I'm one of the discoverers of, called thrombomodulin. We actually started doing clinical studies on thrombomodulin, and the FDA pulled the plug on us. The whole team was in a meeting in uh, Berlin at the time, and there was an announcement there was going to be a special meeting um, in a conference room. So all of the researchers got together in that conference room, and it was announced to us that the FDA pulled the plug on us doing clinical studies on thrombomodulin because they said it can't compete with low molecular weight heparins. And I mean, how would the FDA know that? I mean, clinical studies had only gotten started. It wasn't terminated for any reason except for commercial marketing things. And I mean,
Huh.
literally, scientists were in that room crying because they were so interested in seeing this research done. It would have been a great way to decrease the risk of heart attacks and blood clots and strokes tremendously, but
Yeah.
it got totally canned. Now, 30 years later, actually, this is like 45 years later, no, 35 years later, traumamodulin is back in clinical studies. And it's, it's like, think about all that time that got lost because of the FDA was more focused on commercial aspects instead of the actual benefits to the product. Uh, I mean, it's like, I mean, have I left out anything? What are some of the ways to get research done that,
Well, you're
yeah.
actually sort of leading into my next question.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, Dr. Bill, I want to go back to your sort of hot take, which is that maybe cancer isn't necessarily the enemy because the government is maybe not excited about supporting a longevity of life that we would like to see. And then you were talking a little bit about how drug companies and the FDA and other entities that are sort of associated with the government are having their hand in research and whether that changes whether the research continues or stops or the way the research goes or where the research goes in terms of what the drug is going to be used for. Are drug companies withholding cures for major diseases to maintain profitability? There's a very pervasive belief that pharmaceutical companies suppress cures to continue profiting from treatments. What evidence exists to support or refute this claim? I feel like you've shared a lot about the support.
I wouldn't say that drug companies withhold cures. Okay. I could imagine that being happen, but even if it was happening, there's other things that are actually a bigger obstacle than actually them withholding that. And I think the best example is COVID vaccines. Okay, so four or more big pharma companies rapidly made vaccines that would fight COVID, but they did it in ways that made the vaccines far less efficient than traditional vaccines. Okay, and that's a whole subject I could spend an hour on, and I won't do it now. But they got these on the market really fast. They were making a lot of money from it. Uh, in the meantime, other scientists, including myself, were coming up with ways of making vaccines that would be more effective. Uh, I mean, I don't think anybody's going to deny the fact that the breakthroughs prove that the vaccines were not working nearly as well as like a typical flu vaccine and things like that. I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I get flu vaccines, everything all the time, stuff like that. But I definitely, and I've invented 3 vaccines in the past, for pneumonia and hyodysenteria, and, I know how vaccines work, and I know that there's some illogic problems to the, traditional vaccines that are used now for COVID. But the problem is that when I would come up with an idea for a better vaccine, and friends of mine would also come up with other vaccines, and a lot of these things were in collaboration with other scientists, we couldn't get investors because the investors would say, well, we'd never be able to compete with those big pharma companies that already have the vaccines on. And it was like right away, oh God, they're only interested in return on investment. They're not interested in the health. Uh,
Yeah.
and, again, this is a great chance for these unknown ultra high net worth individuals to come forward. And I say unknown, I said it before too, because the known ultra high net worth individuals, they're all successful because they are interested in return on investment. I've had every every single ultra high net worth individual sitting in my conference room right across the table from me, trying to get them to invest in my research and stuff. But they all say sure, but they would want control. They want quick return on investment. They want to make profits.
It's about the business, not about the science.
Yeah, and so I kind of like turn my back on that whole idea. Uh, and you think of somebody, I guarantee they've been here, but it's actually the competition, and so even people that have come up with cures for different things. I'm a scientific advisor for like what 6 different companies right now, and I've seen some great ideas for curing Alzheimer's, for curing cardiomyopathy, things like that, but they can't get funding because of the granting organizations would turn them down because they don't see how the product could ever be successful given that there's already products out there that would do the same job, just not as well. So yeah, I don't think I'm not aware of any case of where a big pharma company is actually preventing a product from getting on the market. As I mentioned before, I was National Inventor of the Year for my cancer research. When I was working at other biotech companies or big pharma companies, we would invent like a cancer drug or we discover a cancer treatment and things like that. And as soon as the research got done, it would be turned over to the clinical affairs group. And so I would be always attending the clinical affairs meetings, but I really was not in control of things. Uh, and I would listen to the clinical affairs group cut corners. Okay, say, okay, we can skip this test, we can find a cheaper way to do the clinical study, we can, et cetera, et cetera. And I would say, hey, you're gonna kill somebody doing
Mm.
that. And they would say, well, that's okay. The FDA gave us approval. And I would say, well, suppose the drug doesn't work. If we don't include this test in the clinical study, how are we going to know why it didn't work and how we can finagle it to make it work? And they would say, well, that's not the goal here. the goal is to see if this drug is ready for clinical studies. I mean, uh, we're not doing a research project to find an alternative drug to pursue. And I always thought, okay, so that's really interfering with a lot of drug development, especially when you can't use clinical studies to obtain data to find out how to come up with a second generation drug that will work when the first one didn't work. Uh, and clinical affairs will say, well, find out if it's not going to work by doing your in vitro studies. Well, I know that in vitro studies and animal studies very rarely translate to humans.
Mm.
And so you can have like almost every cancer drug that I've been involved in developing worked beautifully in mice. It cured cancer in all cases in mice. But then in clinical studies, it wouldn't work. And then we wouldn't know why it didn't work because we didn't do all the testing and things like that. And just like this trauma modulin I mentioned before, it's like the clinical studies got cut. We did a first preliminary clinical study, and the results weren't as good as, or weren't better. They were equal to low molecular weight heparins, but they weren't better. But that's because we designed the experiment to be able to so that it wouldn't show if it was better or not. But yeah, that's I'm pretty much answered your question, I think.
I think so too. Yeah.
Long-winded.
That's No, that's okay. It's very complicated and seems definitely lopsided towards the monetary version versus the science version. It's kind of the exact opposite of my next question, which is, do any superfoods or drastic dietary changes have the power to cure major diseases? We've got all these rise of these different health trends that promote certain foods as cure-alls, and like, people say a cruciferous vegetable is something that can cure your cancer if you alkalize your body, which involves a lot of different greens that can help make your body an inhabitable place for cancer. There's all of this stuff that's are these actually effective in disease treatment?
Yeah, well, they're effect I mean, definitely a healthier lifestyle, healthier diet is gonna increase your body's ability to fight any disease. But it's not gonna succeed all by itself. And some cases it will, okay? But, you'd mentioned whatever that word is, uh,
Cruciferous.
cruciferous, foods like broccoli, things like that. That comes up a lot. Sulforaphane, which is found in those things, in those kind of foods, is getting a lot of attention because of its ability to induce NF NRF2 production.
Mhm.
And NRF2 has been heavily publicized to reduce oxidative stress. Okay, so yeah, I mean, that's a fact. I mean, but I'm trying to think of the company's name. There's one company that badgers me all the time about trying to get me to help them promote their NRF2 inducing product because it reduces oxidative stress. But I keep saying the data is not really there. I know NRF2 is probably a good thing to have, but the data is not really there to really promote that it's going to work better than taking antioxidant supplements and things like that. I personally will never ever get into promoting false claims or misleading the truth and things like that. And so I just won't. I refuse to help them. Uh, but uh, but it is a benefit. It's just that is there other ways to get benefits too? Now, the nice thing about superfoods that some of them, not all of them are great because there's a lot of people are just interested in return on investment. Focus on superfoods that decrease toxins, that uh, decrease oxidative stress, you know, include fiber or anything that helps the microbiome, uh, you know, uh, decrease inflammation. The number one cause of aging and aging related diseases, inflammation.
Hmm.
Every scientist in the field working on anti-aging will tell you that.
Yeah.
So any foods or something like that that decrease inflammation is going to benefit your body's ability to prevent disease and fight disease. Our immune system is very, very sensitive to toxins and inflammation. Well, inflammation is our immune system, but oxidative is very sensitive to oxidative stress, et cetera. So any of these things, in fact, psychological stress too. Okay, as I mentioned before, studies are showing that optimism helps keep your telomeres long, and pessimism helps keep them short. Uh,
Mm.
and telomere length is a good marker of overall health. Yeah, so I'm a big fan of healthy diets, superfoods, but I because of my ability to do critical meta-analysis of peer-reviewed studies, I'm really good at being able to zoom in on which products are really gonna do the job and which ones aren't. Uh, and
Well, that kinda
I can
leads
tell
me to
you a
my
lot of them
next.
don't. What's that?
Yeah, well, I was gonna say that leads me to my next question because it is about dietary supplements. Do they prevent or cure diseases such as cancer or heart disease, or are there any specific ones that are doing a better job than others? Many individuals believe that taking the supplements can ward off or treat serious illness. Is the current scientific evidence suggesting that that works?
Yeah, I think that's pretty much answered in this last question.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Or at least for
it
a
is.
whole food-based supplements it is.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I didn't understand. Sorry, I didn't understand your last comment about Whole Foods.
Well, because some supplements are synthetic and some supplements are whole food based, and we were talking about food mainly and superfoods and stuff earlier versus if it's synthetically made, it doesn't have the same nutrients that a whole food supplement might have.
Yeah, that's a touchy subject because, um, I mean, it's a case by case, okay? I'm a vegan. I like to eat organic. Uh, I there's a lot of other things about my diet that are really focused on trying to stay healthy, and so I'm a big fan of whole food, plant-based, diets, but I'm also aware of the fact that, uh, they aren't perfect, okay? So I do take pharmaceuticals too, but I have the ability to be able to look at all the studies and be able to decide which pharmaceuticals are good and which ones aren't, and which ones were produced by companies that were only interested in return on investments. That's another thing that I didn't mention before is in my past experiences working with large pharmas, the company would be very interested in terminating a project before it was done just because they said, okay, this is sufficient enough to generate a return on investment. And the scientists would say, wow, we can make it better. We can get rid of side effects and things like that doing medicinal chemistry. But they would say, no, that's too expensive. Let's just go with what we got. And I can't tell you how many times that has happened to me in the past. Um, yeah, so I do believe number one, the best thing to do, plant-based diet is the best thing a person could be doing. Uh, and I like to reference usually when I talk about that a book called Inflammation Nation, where they talk about arachidonic acid. And arachidonic acid is a very inflammatory fatty acid that is found in meats, fowl, fish, and dairy, but it's not found in plants. And so that's a especially good reason to focus on a plant-based vegan diet. But yeah, it's I guess I want to say that plants didn't evolve to be beneficial for humans. Okay, humans evolved to accept a plant-based diet. That's the other side of the coin. And so,
Interesting.
from an evolutionary perspective, which I'm very part of my PhD was in population genetics, which is the study of the why and how of evolution, not the what and when. From an evolutionary perspective, there's no evolutionary advantage to living longer than it takes to raise your young. Just like
Sure.
with society, the species is better likely to survive by eliminating the longer lived. So plant-based diets only really have help us because we evolved to be that way, help us live long enough to raise our young. Afterwards, it doesn't really provide that much benefit, but it does. I mean, It does. It does provide the benefits because it provides the same benefits it did to get you to live long enough to have raised your young, and continuing that is a really good thing for you. But it's not gonna be the cure all, okay? Sometimes I think it is important to, uh, resort to, pharmaceuticals and other ways of of keeping yourself healthy.
Yeah. Well, is there a risk that's associated with consuming high doses of vitamins or minerals through supplementation? I mean, some people assume that more is better when it comes to vitamins. Is there potential danger? Could you megadose and maybe possibly overdose on a supplement? I know some of that is more common with pharmaceuticals than it is with whole food based.
Well, let's say that nutraceuticals, um, sometimes are more toxic than people realize. So it's not necessarily a solution. But in terms of minerals and vitamins, it pretty much depends on whether they're water soluble or fat soluble. Um,
Okay.
the water soluble, you can take tons and tons of it, and if you take too much, it just gets flushed out with your pee, uh, so it's really not a concern there. And the same is true whether you're talking about a pharmaceutical or nutraceutical. But the fat soluble vitamins and minerals, fat solubles include like vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, vitamin K. Those things can build up quite a lot in your body. And since all vitamins and minerals are very involved in many biochemical pathways, and everything, there's a Goldilocks effect. Okay, there's
Sure.
such a thing as too much of a biochemical pathway for, doing its job, and there's such a thing as too little of a biochemical pathway doing its job. You want some place in the middle, and so taking too much of the, especially fat soluble stuff, is going to possibly overdo things. It's like revving an engine too much. Uh, yeah, so it's a case by case again there. So yeah, definitely, I always follow the instructions on the bottle. Okay, especially, and probably the most important one to really not overdo is antioxidants, because most antioxidants become pro-oxidants. They actually increase free radicals, uh,
Oh,
or increase oxidative stress when taken too much. So definitely, this when you look at the bottles, the dose is determined by the fact of when is it optimal. Okay, so stick
yeah.
with that. So never increase your antioxidants.
Do supplements equate to being safe and free from side effects? I mean, you're sort of talking about that here. Is it, I mean, you're saying that if I'm hearing you properly, you're saying that it's based on each supplement and specific to the dosage amount. That's what someone that's taking those should be aware of. But it's common perception that because supplements are natural, whole food supplements are natural, they're inherently safe, which is maybe some is true of that, some is not true of that.
What you just said is exactly. In some cases it's true, in some cases it's not true. But um, we do a lot of like drug development, and not just drugs, but nutraceuticals too here. And we do what's called high throughput drug screening to test different natural products or nutraceuticals and also pharmaceuticals. And we actually do find that a lot of the nutraceuticals are toxic. Okay. But not that. I mean, some of them are super toxic, like, especially the ones that are like chemotherapies, nutraceutical chemotherapies.
Yeah.
That you want them to be toxic. But a lot of the, and I'm not going to mention names, a lot of the uh, well-known nutraceuticals that everybody takes do have toxic side effects. In fact, we use uh, in our toxicity controls. So whenever we're screening for pharmaceuticals or nutraceuticals, we include toxicity controls to weed out anything that's toxic. And for our toxicity controls, we use three popular nutraceuticals.
Mm.
And so whether it's a pharmaceutical or a nutraceutical, we throw away anything that's more toxic than these three nutraceuticals. Uh, and which I wish all biotech companies would do because too many, especially pharmaceuticals, too many toxic pharmaceuticals get on the market because the companies didn't want to spend the extra money to make them safer. Um, but yeah, I'd say I'd say that yeah, you're better off with nutraceuticals, but it doesn't mean that things are perfect. There's still going to be cases of where nutraceuticals are harmful to you. And I mean, okay, so let's look at from a different perspective.
Okay.
When you buy a pharmaceutical, you always see all the side effects. Okay. Well, the FDA requires this. Okay. When the doctors prescribe a medication, they're required to inform the patient of the possible side effects that occur. And so those are always listed. And that scares a lot of people away because practically every pharmaceutical has all these possible side effects. But that's because everybody's different.
Yeah.
Some people are going to be affected by one thing, other people are not. So you have to know, you have to learn about yourself, and you have to also learn about what the side effects really are and how meaningful they are. Now, nutraceuticals. I mean, I've worked with a lot of companies that have put nutraceuticals on the market, and a patient will call in and say, I took your nutraceutical, and I was in bed sick, throwing up, and headaches and everything like that for a week.
My goodness.
And the nutraceutical company will say, well, stop taking it. And that's it. The FDA doesn't require them to list all the side effects. But that doesn't mean that nutraceuticals don't have side effects. And again, everybody's different. Okay. So there's never been a chemical or a nutraceutical on the planet that's been discovered that isn't going to have a negative side effect on somebody. Okay.
Yeah.
So there's always going to be some kind of thing. But it's like, it's tough to choose. But I'm going to recommend um, a book. In fact, there's two books. Um, Probably the best book ever written on supplements is written by Dr. Sandra Kaufmann, Kaufmann. I can't remember if there's two F's or one N or whatever. But the book's called The Kaufmann Protocol, and there's two volumes of that. I think that's the best book because it's formulas on how to figure out what's the right supplements to take and stuff like that. I used to, when I spoke on stage, I used to go through the supplements and describe everything. Now I just refer everybody to Dr. Kaufmann's book.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, it's there's no easy answer. There's no magic pill that's going to make everybody feel better. It's like the combination of the right things is the best way to go move forward.
Yeah. Well, I feel like you maybe answered this, but just to clarify with like a short response, are dietary supplements regulated for safety and efficiency before reaching consumers? I think you said no, that the FDA has a different standard that they hold a nutraceutical to than they do a pharmaceutical.
It depends on the company selling the nutraceutical. Okay, some companies, and pretty much the ones that I work with, are very very good at really weeding out whether or not the nutraceuticals are bad for you or good for you. Okay, but most of the companies, let's say 90% of them at least, don't really care because the FDA was restricted a long time ago from controlling nutraceuticals. Uh, there's a clause it's commonly called the GRAS, GRAS, which stands for generally regarded as safe,
Mhm.
because of the fact that humans have been taking these nutraceuticals for thousands and thousands of years. The FDA is not allowed to regulate nutraceuticals. And so a lot of the companies take advantage of that and put nutraceuticals on the market, even though the nutraceuticals could have some serious toxic side effects, but they can get away with it. And but yeah, and so it's people have to be careful. I I always say look for the Sierra Sciences or Bill Andrews seal of approval. Okay, because believe me, I'm just as interested in my own health as I am everybody else's health, and I I I definitely do the critical meta-analysis of peer-reviewed studies to really find out what's safe, what's not safe, what works, and what doesn't work, and that's
Yeah.
the best way to proceed.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, just to switch up our gears a little bit, how does the complexity and variability of diseases like cancer impede the development of universal cause cures? Considering that cancer encompasses a vast array of diseases with unique genetic profiles, how does this diversity challenge the creation of a single cure? I mean, even down to the different stages that people get it in, that has to be a challenge as well.
Okay, well, people debate me on this a lot, and no offense to these people, a lot of them are not qualified to be debating on this subject, but I was National Inventor of the Year for my cancer research. I do know a lot about cancer, and things I'm gonna say, people are gonna challenge. Okay, one is every cancer is different. Every cancer is caused by mutations. The simple fact that every cancer is different means that every cancer needs to be targeted in a different way to cure that cancer.
Yeah.
And, there's gonna be a lot of overlap between different ways of getting cancer, but the big thing that's missing in the field of cancer is what's common to all cancers and target that. Okay, well, this is again something that's been a very frustrating thing for me because part of why I became National Inventor of the Year was discovering the thing that's in common to most cancers, the thing that's most common to all cancers, and that's the ability to keep telomeres from shortening. Because
I see.
shortening telomeres will be a way to cause a cancer to suddenly die from old age, essentially. And so, in fact, if you have a cancer that's the size of a pimple, that cancer can't exist any longer because the telomeres got so short, it can't divide any longer. But the problem is that because the telomeres got really short, mutation rates are skyrocketing. And so some of those cells inside that pimple are going to mutate to a form that suddenly doesn't require telomere. It still can survive even with telomere shortening because now it found ways to re-lengthen the telomeres. And so I mentioned before that I had, when I was back in my early days, came up with 5 different ways of curing cancer through telomerase intervention. Um, One of those, which I call toxic nucleotides, is a way of not inhibiting telomerase, because if you inhibit telomerase in cancer cells, so let's say the way that cancer becomes bigger than a pimple is to turn on the telomerase gene through mutations. Telomerase gene then keeps the telomeres long. Okay, inhibiting telomerase in cancer cells, which is what 4 of the 5 different things do, uh, will actually cause telomeres to get critically short, cause mutation rates to skyrocket, and then the cancer develops alternate ways of keeping telomeres long, most notably the alt pathway, ALT. That's what's happening a lot with like Rytelo, which I had mentioned before. Cancers are coming back, and they're now their telomeres are kept long by a process called the alt pathway. And so what we need to do is figure out a way to poison telomerase positive cells and alt positive cells, but that's requires too much discovery research, and so nobody's providing the funding to do that. I've had this on my to-do list for 30 years. I've spoken at cancer conferences looking for funding to do this research, but nobody wants to do it because there's they're afraid that it's too much work, it's gonna cost too much, and it's not gonna be a quick return on investment, as much as just designing something from some stuff we already know, works
Uh,
well, could already work. So it's the fact that cancers are so different and every cancer is different has been a major obstacle to curing cancer, and it's the number one reason why we haven't cured cancer. Well,
yeah.
number one reason besides the funding problem issues. And so if we could get a NASA, okay, if we could get a NASA to focus on cancer, we could get cancer because then we could cure cancer because then our efforts would be focused on a cure, not just profits. And
Yeah.
that's a good way to finish that answering that question.
No, I like it. All right. Well, my last question for you is, and you sort of talked about this, it sounds like it's going to be money. What challenges exist in translating scientific discoveries into effective treatments for major diseases? Despite numerous breakthroughs in the labs, what obstacles prevent these findings from becoming widely available therapies?
The answer is the same as if I've been saying. It's like
Funding, funding,
the sci-
funding.
usually the scientists can discover a mechanism to cure a disease, but then they can't get the funding to actually do the research to discover. So then it goes to applied research. They can't do the applied research or discovery research to find some way of affecting that pathway.
Yeah.
And that I mean that this covers COVID vaccines, cancer, heart disease. I said I'm a scientific advisor for several companies. They're all looking for funding to find ways to impede the biochemical pathway that they've discovered that plays a major role in the disease. And they can't get that because it's not quick enough return on investment.
Yeah. Mm. I hate that funding is such a big issue, and it does seem that enough people die frequently from cancer that somebody would put up the funding. But I guess you're right. It needs to be one of these people that has the funding and the ability to make the change to do it. Maybe that requires somebody close to them being the person affected.
First of all, they don't know that it depends on them. That's the big
Right.
problem. They think everything is under control. They think that all this money is being spent on curing cancer, things like that. Somebody's going to do it. Or they think because all this money has been done and cancer is not cured, maybe it's impossible.
Right.
They're wrong. They're misled. And the big campaigns, if I had $1 trillion, believe
I know.
me,
You'd
cancer
be
would be
curing
cured, heart
cancer.
disease would be cured, Alzheimer's would be cured, because my focus would be on just getting the cure, not the profits.
Dr. Andrews, as we finish up, is there one current positive takeaway from current cancer research that you can share with us?
Yes, cancer can be cured. Heart disease can be cured. Alzheimer's can be cured. I work with a lot of really excellent scientists in collaborations, or some of them work here, and we know what to do. Science is not the obstacle. It's all funding. It's all funding. Solving the funding problems. We could have cancer cured, heart disease cured, Alzheimer's cured, diabetes cured. There's no end to the number of diseases that we could cure if the focus wasn't totally on return on investment.
Yeah. There's a more focus on the people with the disease. Yeah. Well, thank you. And thank you for your time today. Thanks for joining us on Up One. If you found today's conversation valuable, be sure to subscribe and share this episode with someone who's curious about the real science behind health.
Have a topic you want us to break down? Send us your questions. We're here to help you separate fact from fiction.
Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and let's keep taking it up one.